Hey guys, how you doing? Dr. Thompson here, and today I want to go over with you a question a lot of people, especially women, ask me, is they say, Dr. Nate, please help me. I have hypothyroidism. The doctors have put me on Synthroid, and I still feel absolutely awful. Why is that? So today I want to ask this really common question that I get, and give you some answers as far as why. All right. So let's talk a little bit about thyroid conditions. Right now, there's about 30 million Americans who have some kind of thyroid condition, whether it be hypothyroidism, hyperthyroidism, Graves' disease, autoimmune disease related to the thyroid. They say 30 million Americans, which is a little under 10% of people in the United States. But then they also say that there are many, many, many people who actually just go undiagnosed because they just feel like garbage. And they just think it's related to, certain other factors. So let's go over the thyroid a little bit to help you understand why and what you can do as some first steps in order to, start working on correcting this and get this under control. Now, let's talk about the symptoms. Okay, so let's talk about some of the symptoms of having an underactive thyroid. Now, we're not going to talk about an overactive thyroid. We're not going to talk about Graves' disease or anything like that. But I do want you to understand this: is that when when you get testing and the thyroid isn't working right, just understand that you don't have a thyroid problem. And I know that sometimes people's panties can get in a bunch because they say, no, you don't understand. I do have a thyroid problem. Because it's right here. It's right on my lab tests. Just understand this, is that when you have an issue with your hormones, whether it's a thyroid, whether it's your uterus, or whether it's your ovaries, men, it's your testes, is that you don't have a problem there. Those organs are just the receivers. So they just are receiving the specific hormone and neurological messages and telling it actually what to do. So really, if you have a thyroid issue, it's not the thyroid's fault. It's something is happening elsewhere. I hope that makes sense to you. But let's go over some of the symptoms of having hypothyroidism. Trouble sleeping, fatigue, brain fog or an inability to focus or concentrate, dry skin and hair, depression, constipation, sensitivity to cold, frequent and heavy periods in women, and chronic joint and muscle pain. So sounds like a lot of people have those symptoms, and a lot of people and a lot of doctors may actually say, well, maybe you have a thyroid issue. Let's go ahead and run some tests. So thank God that they're going to run some tests. The problem is that your labs are incomplete. And I want to show you why they're incomplete and why you can be missing the boat as far as your labs are concerned, because it won't give 100% complete picture. So here's the question, because I have many people who will say, can you take a look at my labs and see if you can come up with anything? And usually I take one look at it and I say, your labs are incomplete. And by incomplete, I'm not saying that they're wrong. I'm just saying is based off this lab testing, we don't have enough information to actually figure out why. So for example, these are the specific tests that you actually see here. I'm going to bring this up so that you can see this a little bit better. So this is actually the testing that I order when we want to look at the thyroid. All right. So let's talk about all these different things. So let's say you go to your medical doctor and they're going to do some kind of thyroid panel. Well, the thyroid panel that they're going to run is really just going to consist of TSH, T3, and T4. Usually, that's all that it is, just those three things. Now look at all the other things that we can get valuable clinical information from to actually figure out why your thyroid isn't working the way that it's supposed to. All of these other tests. But let's break this down. Let's look at what the purpose of these tests are actually for, so that you can actually understand maybe why your thyroid isn't working the way it's supposed to, and then you can actually get the right and appropriate tests. So let's look at the first one, TSH. So TSH is called thyroid stimulating hormone, and it's actually not a thyroid hormone. It's a brain hormone. So this is actually released from the pituitary gland, and it travels down to the thyroid, and it tells the thyroid to start making thyroxine, particularly mostly T4. So this is actually a brain hormone, has nothing to do with your thyroid, but it's a brain hormone in response to what's happening in other parts of the body. So it's a brain hormone that can be altered with taking drugs or having a tumor or being under chronic stress. Now, when you look at T3, T3 is considered the active form of thyroxine. So this is the one that the cells within the body are actually utilizing to stimulate metabolism or to stimulate normal function inside of the body. T4 is actually considered the inactive form. And by inactive form, it means that the body doesn't actually use that. However, your thyroid produces mostly T4. So the thyroid produces about 85% or so of T4. The other 15% is T3, which means in order for your body to actually use the active form of T3 is that it needs to be converted from T4 into T3. Here's what's really interesting, is conversion of this hormone takes place mostly in the gut and in the liver. So gives you some more information as far as what's happening when you're looking at this test, is what's happening with your gut health and what's also happening with your liver health too. Now, free T3 and free T4, this is actually what we would call unbound. So hormones, in order for them to be able to travel through your bloodstream, hormones need to be bound to something, and they need to be bound to what's known as a carrier protein. So hormones are usually bound to these carrier proteins. The carrier protein is actually called thyroid binding globulin, okay? And these carrier proteins are considered kind of like the bus. So they're the bus and they transport these hormones throughout the body, and T3 and T4 are like the students in the bus. So free T3 and free T4 are actually showing, giving you kind of a better understanding of where you're at as far as your hormone production. So this is actually a little bit better number than just T3 and T4. Now, resin T3 uptake. And this is kind of a big word, but this is like saying, when this bus is taking the hormones through the bloodstream to different parts of the body, resin T3 uptake is kind of like saying, well, okay, so how many how many seats do we have available on the bus? So this can give us even more information. Now, cortisol. You should always get cortisol measured whenever you're actually checking the thyroid. And the reason why is because when the doctor prescribes Synthroid, for example, which is an extremely popular drug, is that even if you look on the website or if you go onto WebMD or drugs.com, is that there's a specific contraindication to taking Synthroid. This contraindication is, which means you should never be on Synthroid if you have what's known as adrenal insufficiency, meaning we call this adrenal fatigue, meaning the body has been stressed out so much that the adrenal glands can't even make cortisol anymore, or are very insufficient in making cortisol, which is a stress hormone. Now, there are a whole heck of a lot of people that have adrenal insufficiency. And so, but doctors aren't actually measuring cortisol to see if even Synthroid is a contraindication to taking it. Now, the next one is called TBG, which is known as thyroid binding globulin. And again, this is the carrier protein or the bus that's taking the T4 throughout parts of the body and T3 throughout parts of the body. So this is, again, the bus. So this helps us to see this, hey, how many buses do we have available to transport all these things? And again, this is saying how many seats do we have on the bus? Now, this is really important too, is that this and this, which is anti-thyroglobulin antibodies and thyroid peroxidase antibodies, this is really important. So if you actually go within the thyroid, which is making thyroxin, you need a couple of things. One of them you need is known as the amino acid known as tyrosine. So tyrosine, you need it in order to produce thyroxin. So eating high tyrosine type food helps the body with the raw materials to produce thyroxin. Now you also need another one, which is known as iodine. So here you have these raw materials, and they go into the thyroid to manufacture these hormones. Well, one of them you need in order to make T1, which then into T2, then into T3, and then into T4, and bind these tyrosines and iodine together is called thyroglobulin. So that's how you start binding these to go from T1, 2, 3, and 4. And then another one is you need an enzyme called thyroid peroxidase that turns iodine into iodide. So these things right here are needed to actually make T4 within the thyroid. Now, if your body is making antibodies against these two specific things, you ain't gonna make thyroxin. So if anyone has any kind of high antibodies towards these two things, it automatically means that this is an autoimmune condition, also known as Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which is an autoimmune hypothyroidism. Now, not every case of hypothyroidism is autoimmune, because there's other forms of hypothyroidism that we're going to talk about. Now, the next one is reverse T3, and I see more doctors actually ordering this, but reverse T3 is kind of like this. It's kind of like the brakes on the bus. So it slows down the conversion of T4 into T3. So for some reason, if the body is under some kind of stress and it needs to actually slow down metabolism, this is where reverse T3 is going to come in. And then another test, ferritin. Ferritin is actually the iron storage protein within the blood. So obviously when people say, hey, I'm anemic, it's not necessarily just, just that you're not getting enough iron. You also have to look at ferritin too. Now, you also need iron for thyroid production. So this can tell you, again, some more things. You might be iron deficient, but also figure out why you might be iron deficient. And then finally, something that everyone should know about is going to be vitamin D3. So checking your vitamin D levels. Now, I recommend your vitamin D levels should be at about 60 to 70 nanograms per deciliter. And almost everyone, when we test this, are deficient unless they have been actively supplementing with vitamin D3, particularly during the winter months. Now, this is particularly important, especially when it comes to anything in regards to autoimmunity, because the immune system and vitamin D are linked together. So lower amounts of vitamin D3 have been linked to specific forms of autoimmunity. So when you look at this test, you see all the different things that we need to look at in order to see, okay, why is the thyroid not working right? So go grab your labs and see which ones are actually on there. Do you have actually all of these, or do you only have a couple? There's a big difference in actually figuring this out. And let me give you an example, because this will actually give you show you a big reason why. A lot of people are on Synthroid and they still feel like garbage. So again, once you actually have labs that can complete, you have to ask the question then is, why is the thyroid not working the way that it's supposed to? Here's the questions you have to ask. So now you have to start getting into causes. Because again, if you have a hypothyroid, the reason why is not just because you have a lack of Synthroid inside of the body. So now you have to start figuring out, hey, why is the body adapting in a manner that is slowing down the production of normal thyroxin? So the 4 questions that you have to ask are this. Okay, so I have a hypothyroidism. Is this a problem with production? So is this a production issue? So is my body having a hard time actually making it? And this is actually where, things like not having the right nutrition can actually come in. However, it's a very small percentage of people who have hypothyroidism. It may be that you don't have enough iodine, and maybe you're not having enough tyrosine, enough selenium, B vitamins, iron, and things like that, just to be able to produce and manufacture thyroxine. However, that's rarely the only reason why, very rarely. Now, the next thing is this actually a conversion issue? Is this a conversion issue? So am I having a hard time actually converting T4 into the active form of T3? Now, listen, if you are, this conversion takes place again in the gut and the liver, which means is that if this is a conversion issue, the problem is coming from somewhere else, either the liver or the gut. This is why many times, if we're looking at someone who has a thyroid issue and I say, hey, first test that we need, obviously besides looking at the spine and the nervous system, see how stressed that is let's get a food allergy test and let's do a stool sample. And people are like, why a stool sample? Because we need to see where that inflammation is coming from, but we also need to see why this isn't converted in certain parts of the body. Next question you ask is this an autoimmune issue? So could this actually be because the immune system is actually attacking the thyroid peroxidase, or is it actually attacking the thyroid globulin? Is it producing antibodies against this? The other thing is saying, hey, where is this interference actually coming from? So where could the interference be coming from? Because there's other things of where it could be coming from too. There may be an issue with toxicity. You may be actually interfering with your estrogens. You may be interfering with having high amount of chlorine or fluorine in your body that are competing for the same binding sites. So you understand is that this can start to become really complex, and you almost have to be like an investigator to try to figure out and solve this puzzle as far as why is the body adapting in this manner. And I want to actually give you an example so that you can see what this would actually look like. And this is actually someone who brought me their tests, and they're still incomplete, by the way, because there's not cortisol on here. There's just a couple of things that there's ferritin is not on here. However, this person who ordered the test was starting to get onto something by ordering a couple of things. So when you look at this person, and I'm going to bring this up so you can see this just a little bit better. But when you look at this actual lab test up here, this is TSH. So you can see this person is actually already taking Synthroid and started to feel like garbage even more. So decides to go back and say, hey, why do I feel like garbage? Do I need to actually increase the dosage of my medications? So the doctor's like, well, we shouldn't have to. Let's order a couple of more tests. So you see that her thyroid stimulating hormone started to go up even more. So what's happening is the signal's not being heard. And so the brain is starting to shout to the thyroid, say, hey, you need to start making more of this thyroxine. Now, what's interesting, though, is you actually see that her T3 is normal, although it's on the very low end of normal. You also see down here, you see her T4 is actually a little bit on the high end of normal. So if you look at these two things, you see that she's actually making free T4, but it's not actually getting converted into the active form of T3. Now, here's what's interesting is when you look at thyroid globulin antibody and looking at her TPO antibodies, you can actually see that these two things are through the roof. So when I looked at this, I said, my goodness, how long have you been on Synthroid for? She said for 20 years. And I looked at this and I said, my goodness, for 20 years, they probably have not they've been misdiagnosing you as far as why you have a thyroid issue, because this is actually a classic case of Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which is an autoimmune issue. Now, the other thing that scared her a little bit and alarmed her was that she started to break out with a rash across her cheeks, known as a butterfly rash, and that's actually one of the telltale signs of lupus. So the thing is with any kind of autoimmune type condition, is once you have one, it opens the floodgates for a whole heck of a lot more. So really, one of the biggest things that's happening inside of her is that she's having autoimmunity. Her immune system is reacting to so many different things. So again, when you look at this, guys, this isn't even a thyroid issue. This is a problem with the immune system. And the problem is not adding more Synthroid. The problem is finding the reason why the immune system is acting in this manner. Why is the body wanting to do this? So again, this is not a thyroid issue. This is a problem with the immune system. So where on earth do you start? I know that I went over a lot of things, but hopefully for those of you, if you've been looking at your labs and trying to figure this out on your own, this is a good place for you to start, and just understand that your labs are incomplete. So where on earth do you start? Well, a great place to actually start is at our upcoming talk on Saturday, March 23rd at 10 a.m. at our office, known as our approach to inflammation. So at this talk, one of the reasons why this talk is so good is because we start going into really what inflammation does inside of the body, where it's actually coming from, and what you start doing to handle this inflammation from 3 different areas. The 3 different areas are your traumas, looking at your thoughts or stress, and then looking at toxins. Those are the 3 different areas of where you're producing inflammation. And again, remember, is that nearly all disease actually starts with the process of inflammation. So remember, every single time you have an inflammatory process, you also have to have an immune system reaction to it. So Saturday, March 23rd, 10 o'clock here at our office, Exemplify Health Center. And I'll leave the link in the description, but you can simply register at exemplifyhealth.eventbrite.com. So registration is going to be closing in just a couple of days. You can register for that. But hey, guys, if you have a question, let me know. If you have a comment, let me know. Send me a private message if you have a question regarding this, and make sure that you get registered for this event. So guys, I hope this helps you out in your quest for better health, better energy. And again, leave me a question or a comment if you have it. And if you have any other ideas as far as what you want me to talk about coming up in future weeks, let me know as well. So be well, enjoy your Thursday, and we'll see you soon.